Welcome to Basic Physics Learning. Today we will discuss a very important topic, or rather we enter what is modulation and why we need modulation in our daily life and what is the different kind of modulation. So friends, welcome.
In radio or wireless communication system, the baseband signal or the message signal produces from different sources such as speech, music or song is first converted into corresponding electrical signal with the help of microphone, and having the electrical signal having the frequency range of 20 Hz to 20 kHz, which does not suitable for direct transmission over a channel, because these signals are need to be further modification to facilitate transmission. This conversion process known as modulations. In this process, the baseband signal or message signal is used to modify some parameter of generally high frequency carrier signal, and the message signal MT generally a low frequency signal. If the carrier amplitude varies according to the baseband signal or message signal, then it is called amplitude modulated wave. If the frequency of carrier wave varies according to the message signal, are called FM wave. At the receiver end, the modulated signal must pass through a reverse process called demodulation in order to reconstruct the message signal or the baseband signal. So, to transmit the baseband signal far away from the transmitter having some real difficulties. Baseband signal cannot be transmitted directly but with the help of carrier signal, which is high frequency. If the signal transmitted wirelessly, here the message signal is MT, and if the antenna length L and the wavelength of transmitted wave is lambda, then the antenna length and transmitted wavelength are related through L proportional lambda. As we know, the frequency and the wavelength are related through the relations lambda equal to c by nu, where nu is the frequency. For 1 kHz message signal, the wavelength will be 300 km. For many message signal, the wavelength are too large for reasonable antenna dimensions. If we consider the radiating antenna should be in order to 1/10 or more of the wavelength of signal radiated. Here we see L equal to lambda by 10. L is the radiating antenna length equal to 1/10 of the wavelength of radiating signal. For a power of speech signal, the speech signal having the frequency range 100 to 3000 Hz, corresponding wavelength lambda equal to 100 to 3000 kilometers. These long wavelength would necessitate an impractical size of antenna. Instead, we modulate a high frequency carrier. Thus, we translate the signal spectrum to the region of carrier frequency that correspond to a much smaller wavelength. For example, a 1 MHz carrier has a wavelength of only 300 meter and requires an antenna whose size is in order to 30 meter. In this aspect, modulation is like letting the baseband signal hitchhike on a high frequency sinusoidal carrier. The carrier and the baseband signal may be compared to a stone and a piece of paper. If we wish to throw a piece of paper, it cannot go too far by itself, but by wrapping it around a stone, a carrier, it can be thrown over a longer distance. Another reason why we need to modulate the message signal or baseband signal.
to simultaneous transmission of several message signals, we need to reduce the interference. Why we need to reduce the interference? Or why the interference appear? Let us take a look through an easy example. Suppose in a room, 3 persons are talking to a single person. Then the single person could not hear anything because the talk of 3 persons are getting mixed and lost because their talks are overlapped. Here, like previous example, consider the case of 5 radio stations broadcasting audio message signal directly through a single channel without any modifications. So they would interfere with each other because the spectra of all signals occupy more or less the same bandwidth. Thus it would be possible to broadcast from only on radio or television station at a time, but this is wasteful, and as it is a very time consuming, because at any time the single channel bandwidth may be much larger than any message signal. To solve this problem easily, we can use modulation technique. We can use various audio signals to modulate different carrier frequencies, thus translating each signal to a different frequency range. Translating each signal to a different frequency range, and the various larger carrier frequency that are chosen must be sufficiently far apart away. So the spectra of modulated signals will not overlap and thus will not interfere with each other. At the receiver, one can use a tunable band pass filter to select the desired station or signal. This method of transmitting several signals simultaneously is known as frequency division multiplexing or FDM. Here the bandwidth of the channel is shared by various signals without any overlapping. I mean, at first all the message signals are taken and they are modulated different carrier frequencies, and then they are transmitted through a single channel without overlapping. That is, frequency at first devised, then modulated, and then multiplexed. I mean, they are passing through but transmitting through a single channel. Another method of multiplexing of several signals is known as time division multiplexing or TDM. This method is suitable when the signal is in the form of pulse trains. As the signal, we have seen these at the signal, or here is the pulse trains, or is PCM. The pulses are made narrower and the space that are left between pulses are used for other pulses. Thus, in effect, the transition time is shared by a number of signals by interleaving the pulse train of various signals in a specified order. At the receiver, the pulse trains corresponding to various signals are separated. For advanced learners, this is a frequency response curve of gain versus frequency of band pass filters. Band pass filters having two cutoff frequencies, one as FL and one is FH. The pass band situated between two stop bands. One stop band is 0 to FL and the other stop band is F greater FH. One stop band is 0 to FL and F greater FH. Obviously, the FH is greater than FL and the bandwidth is FH minus FL. This is the frequency response of band pass. In summary, of need of modulation is: number one, direct transmission is limited to only small distances. Number two, direct transmission requires antenna of abnormal size. Number three, in direct transmission there is a
possibility of signals from different stations getting mixed and lost. Primarily, modulations are divided in two types. First is analog modulation, second is digital modulation. If the message signal is analog, then it is called analog modulation. If the message signal is in digital form, I mean ons and zeros, called digital modulation. Analog modulation is in two types: continuous wave modulation and pulse modulation. Continuous wave means if the carrier signal is a continued wave signal, I mean like sine wave signals, is called continuous wave modulations. Pulse modulation, on the other hand, if the carrier signal is a pulse signals, I mean 0, 1, this is called pulse modulations. This in here we see the carrier frequency is a sinusoidal frequency. Frequency start from 0 to Vc, so the amplitude is Vc and the message signal is empty. Both combined we can get the amplitude modulated wave. Here we see the amplitude modulated wave, which construct by modulating carrier wave according to the message signal. I mean the shape of the carrier wave changes according to the message signal. Here the carrier is a sinusoidal wave, Vc equal to Vc cos theta t. Vc is the instantaneous value and the capital Vc is the amplitude of the peak value and theta t is the angular displacement, and the omega equal to d theta dt. Here omega t equal to d theta dt and theta t equal to, after integrating we get omega ct plus pi. For an unmodulated carrier, omega समान omega c समान a constant carrier frequency and v समान vc cos omega ct plus theta, counting time from theta equal to 0. Modulation is done by two ways. First is changing the carrier amplitude according to the message signal. Secondly, the total phase of carrier signal is changed according to the message signal. The frequency of carrier wave changes according to the amplitude of message signal. Secondly, the continuous wave modulations. The continuous wave are divided in amplitude modulation, frequency modulation and phase modulations. In next classes we will discuss every modulation in details. So please like, share and subscribe. Until wait for next video and keep tuning.